We now welcome Mr. Angelo Friggieri from Accenture, the Managing Director and the Head of Security and Government here in Australia. Angelo is a graduate proudly of the University of Wollongong. He did his research work with Dr. Michael, MG Michael and myself on some very front-running emerging technologies. And we are not surprised he entered the security space. He loved security, I think, every day of his undergraduate studies. And he was at our second workshop. He said to me the other day, he has the volumes of the proceedings still on his bookshelf. Over to you, Angelo, and thank you for your time. So we went from the philosopher to the practitioner.
Thank you very much, Katina. Very honoured and humbled to be with you today. I am just trying to get some bypass some security controls to allow me to share some content with you. But whilst I get started, so yes, graduate of the University of Wollongong, and also spent a year at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which was fantastic over there. The level of research into some of these topics is phenomenal. So yes, I look after Accenture's security business for government and health here in Australia and New Zealand. I also have a second role, which allows me to look after our national security portfolio of customers. And then
we'll just wait patiently for Angelo to return. This is an actual, very much a connection to Michael Eldred's talk on control, what we are allowed to do and what we are not allowed to do. Quite interesting in that way. Sometimes security is a paradox. You know, the more security we have, the less productivity we can sometimes have. They become barriers to entry and even barriers to productivity. And it all has to do with access control. It's fascinating, but let's hope it's not a permanent network issue. Michael, are you still there before Angelo comes back? Did you want to say anything on what just happened? I probably caught you by surprise, Michael Eldred.
Yeah, I'm having a few technical problems here.
That's a good echo. Actually, we've got Angelo back, but I like that statement. We're having a few technical problems.
Yeah, my algorithms are telling me what I can and can't do. And at the moment, it's saying I've got a problem with, yeah.
You know, this is the reality. We're talking national security, and many of us don't have enough bandwidth. I interviewed Mr. Pat Scannell the other day for my PIT 502 class, and this was a major issue. I interviewed Mark Hurst yesterday, who said a citizen bought out a $10,000 page saying, my internet is not good enough. How do you expect me to be productive? And then he made national news. So this is a real issue. This is life. And in fact, we may have lost Angelo one more time when we're in different locations and we haven't really estimated our teletraffic for the busy hour in the context that we're in our suburban homes. This is what occurs, outages. What can you say about that, Michael?
You could say that the cyber world is the medium which is sold to us as the medium for our convenience, but it turns out to be the medium for our severe inconvenience as well. It's two-sided, and we are more and more sucked into exactly what the algorithms say we can and cannot do. Apart from any issue of being surveilled, even before that.
Yes,
we
Michael.
have this dictatorship of the algorithms.
I think Professor Jeremy Pitt might actually use that term in his own talk, the dictatorship of the algorithms. That's one for a proceeding somewhere. They dictate our movements, perhaps, or our interplay. Angela, are you back with us? Do we have your sound?
I am back. Apologies.
Wonderful to have you. No problem. Whenever you're ready, my friend.
we're in the process of banning the use of Zoom on our infrastructure due to the security flaws within Zoom itself. So hopefully with the next workshop next year on a different platform, Katina, I could help you with that.
Listen, you were always a sales guy. I'm joking. But no, seriously, this is not the first time. And in fact, I've had to send out the meeting notice to people's personal accounts because their work account will just reject it. So I understand in context. Go ahead.
So yes, where was I? University of Wollongong graduate, spent a year in Illinois, absolutely fantastic. If I'm not doing what I'm doing now, I'd probably be a chef and continue to be an arrogant techno geek. I like to think of myself as Katina's best student, although I suspect that that fact is not yet confirmed. So, for those of you who don't know, what's an Accenture? We are a global technology services and strategy organization with a focus now in security quite heavily. We have about 500,000 people around the world, and at today's count, 8,000 of those are security professionals from a range of strategy, risk and compliance work through to application platform, cloud security, cyber defense systems, digital identity, and then managed security services. So in my role, I look after that breadth of services for government across Australia and New Zealand. And as mentioned earlier, I also look after our national security portfolio of customers, and that's where I spend most of my time. So focusing on how I can help these customers who have often lived obviously behind closed doors, building and developing technology in-house because the inherent, I guess, threats of having that technology developed from outside the sovereignty of that. But then by virtue of that, these organizations are becoming farther and farther behind the adversary, noting that the advancement of technology from outside that world is continuing to accelerate. So I'm helping these organizations effectively modernize securely, effectively, and from a social perspective as well, in a considerate way. The unwinnable war. So when I think about security, and this is my views, I'd say, not necessarily Accenture's views, this is me talking today. I look at this as a war, and I think industry look at security as a battle, and a series of battles. So if we think about the front that is the war with cybersecurity, we're talking about the traditional script kiddies and security researchers just looking to make a quick buck, looking to prove themselves that, hey, they could hack into the CIA, hey, they could get this information. And that's quite evolved to now organized crime operating in this cybersphere, terrorism and extremists operating in the cybersphere. And if we look at all that as a threat and we look at what the target is those three pillars: citizens, government, and corporations, but for many different reasons. And we as a society, from what I can see, are looking at these as individual pillars rather than how we're working together for a common goal. If we then look at how this has changed with COVID-19, the attack surface has strengthened and the defenses have weakened, where we look at billions of transactions, financial or otherwise, data generation being conducted from lounge rooms and spare bedrooms on unsecure devices. And millions of dollars are being spent on securing the primary infrastructure, securing what an organization would see as their golden egg with regards to their data holdings. But who's actually looking at the points of data ingress and egress? So in the example of a federal health system of record, there's millions of dollars spent on securing that database, that system, the people-based controls around that as well. But it's who's looking at securing the little GP and medical center down the road. who's helping them, who's incentivizing them to do that, who is securing the small businesses and their interactions with financial institutions and with government institutions. So until we start looking at this as a war rather than these battles, and collaborating effectively between industry, government, educational institutions, and the general public, when we're going to see this threat ever accelerating rather than an easing, and we're going to get further and further behind and increase our risk dramatically. In real terms, to sort of where I see some of this, so this is a project one of my teams and I worked on recently within the Australian government. We're looking at countering violent extremism. So the particular intelligence organization responsible for that really needed something. This is in the midst of the Syrian conflict, and where ISIS using Twitter and Facebook and other social media to spread fake news, and using bots to in terms of deep learning, etc., against us, and really for the general public not realizing or able to distinguish between truth and lie. And at the time, it would take the government a matter of days to respond to anything that may be bubbling up in social media. An example of that might be that a tweet that the coalition forces have bombed a hospital, killing innocent women and children. It would take time, A, to realize that that message is out, B, to verify whether that actually is fact or fiction, come up with the reasonable response and understand what the reaction to that response may or may not be, and get that approved and signed off, and then actually put that out there in the world through social media or other means. And by the time that process has gone through, as everyone on this call would know, the lie has gotten hold, and the lie is now the truth, because that's out there. It's been shared billions of times. It's across all platforms of media, and if the government comes out 3 days later to deny it, who are people going to believe? So using a combination of our own inbuilt AI, as well as a couple of our partners working together to develop this platform that enabled us to pick up these points of potential violent extremism, be able to do that and have sentiment analysis in 50 different languages. So the understanding of when someone says, oh, that's bad, as in that's badass in terms of bad equals good, versus that's bad, meaning it actually is bad. And then the complexities of language when we're talking about the Paris Hilton example. So understanding the difference between Paris Hilton, the individual, versus Paris Hilton, the hotel in Paris, or Paris Hilton visiting the Hilton Paris Hotel. So being able to actually enhance the learning and training of these systems to do that. Through that exercise, it was interesting to actually find out how some of these things like hashtags, etc., are getting that proliferation, and where they're actually coming from. An example being that the Pray for Nice. So when we saw the Nice attacks with the trucks going into the crowds of people, the first instance of that Pray for Nice hashtag, and the fact that was shared around, after the event, the first instance of that hashtag was actually from ISIS praying for the people, the mercenaries going out to do the deed on behalf of ISIS, and the fact that the Western world had picked up that hashtag in more of an act of solidarity to pray for Nice, as opposed to praying for the effects themselves. The other challenge with this warfare is that from a human scale, we are massively outnumbered. If we look at traditional warfare with the likes of the Iraqi conflicts and Desert Storm, it's a 1 to 1.2. So the coalition forces have, 120% of the other forces. In today's war, it's inversed and extremely, in the other direction. And selfishly, I'm talking about us within the Five Eye compared to some of the threats that we are facing. So with China's China Army and other nation-based threat actors, where they've got multi-tiered organizational structures of people totally focused on attacking Western organizations, Western governments, for their own obvious gain. So we need to look at how do we leverage technology, because we're not going to automatically front up the people or have the capacity of resources to generate that size of workforce. So in terms of other examples where we've worked with the likes of large communications providers, overwhelmed with the number of systems they need to patch, and understanding the prioritization of that and maintaining security. Through one of our organizations, iDefense, based out of DC, is a threat intelligence capability that has a linking to our centers in the UK, in Australia, in Prague, and a couple of other locations, where gathering that real-time intelligence about these emerging threats and coming up with the resolutions to those quite quickly. So using that threat intelligence to help them combat these threats, or at least understand your prioritization. We then take that one step further when we're looking at applying AI to this. So understanding how a threat actor may behave, understanding their next step, and basically becoming the threat in order to train the models to deal with threats, or in some case, what we're seeing, generate an ever-moving infrastructure base. So when we've got the technologies of infrastructure and platform as a service, the ability to have that continuously moving physically and digitally as a roaming attack surface to prevent the brute force style and continuous attacking at a single entity. So we're using AI in that way as a positive sense, and to help with the cybersecurity war. Putting another sort of reflection against traditional war to the cyber war that we're dealing with is a traditional war starts off, there's a political announcement followed by an attack, a F-18 drops a bomb. When we're looking at this war, sometimes the attack has taken place, or rather in most cases, the attack has taken place and the organization, the government, does not know that that has occurred for at least 6 months. So 6 months, you have your data holdings being taken, you have bots being planted on your network, you are using social engineering to take over certain networks and systems and gain access for various reasons. 6 months that is happening before that is realized. So imagine the amount of damage that is occurring. So again, using AI to troll through the networks to understand what can be done about it. So when we look at this, it's all about knowing the threat, so understanding what is the threat in terms of who are they and what are they looking for. Too often organizations think about their crown jewels. They think about, this is the most important thing to me, and therefore I'm going to spend the money protecting that. But they ignore the fact that what's most important to them is not necessarily what's most important or most advantageous to the potential attacker. What can they monetize? What can they use to spill government? What can they do to influence elections? What can they use to destroy economies? So actually understanding that from that lens, where we have former intelligence officers, political scientists, researchers, along with our technology teams working together to solve these challenges. We then use our systems to then become the threat and continuously test these systems, continuously attack these systems, and attack and adjust as we go. So our Cyber Fusion Center, which if Katina's sending out some information later, I'll give you some information to that in terms of how we're doing that in the US and also here in Sydney for our customers, our governments, where we're using those centers both to continuously evolve the cyber defense systems, but also joint research with educational institutions, startups, and governments in terms of developing the next iterations of technology and ideas to better solve for these challenges. So AI, I've given you a couple of examples of how AI can be used in a positive sense, but the reality is when we're talking AI, there's massive risk from in a negative sense, right? So the AI has created a brand new attack surface. And when I talk about AI, I'm talking about robotics through to automation through to supervised, unsupervised machine learning, and of course deep learning, and with deep neural engines. And in today's world, I would have thought that neural engines, perhaps we need to be neural renewable energy motors as opposed to engines. However, I digress. Computational power has obviously gotten a lot cheaper, which has allowed these technologies to flourish, but then has also allowed the attackers to take advantage. And where this is becoming scary is when the AI has taken a mind of its own. Now, I say that and my mind goes back, and I'm sure many of you, your minds go back to footage of in the 90s of toasters and blenders bending together to attack humans. And sure, that might seem a bit far-fetched, but the reality is probably much worse than that. If we think about the use of AI today, industrial control systems controlling power grids and nuclear power plants, energy, water, from the autonomous vehicles. And I'm sure you've all had to use the capture and recapture tool from Google, where the system is trying to determine whether you're a robot or not, and it asks you, please click all the images that contain a bus, right? What you're doing is not, sure, you're proving that you're a human, but in reality, what you're doing is helping train these neural networks to understand that is a bus, that is an orange, that is a staircase, for the Google autonomous vehicles and other AI systems to continuously learn. That's the whole purpose of that tool. Food production. So imagine the infiltration of food production, the ability for to attack the AIs and the robotics in those systems, and the impact that could have in terms of poisoning populations, etc. We're doing a lot of work at the moment in FS sector within the UK around anti-money laundering, especially with recent regulations in Europe, etc., where ensuring that organizations and entities trying to make transactions with a particular bank are not doing so on behalf of terrorists. So AI systems to understand when that's happening, but obviously then the risk of those systems being compromised in favor of the terrorists. So when we're talking about this, I'm talking about adversarial AI, and we're talking about where we can use or data sets, feed these AI models data sets, where all of a sudden the AI's version of reality has changed. The AI's version of reality, its understanding of good, bad, and evil has been inversed. It can do things on behalf of the attacker rather than the intent. And at times, this is unbeknownst to the operator, unbeknownst to the consumer of that service, and the obvious risk that poses. I mentioned deep learning, and this is where it starts to get interesting, where the advancements in AI beyond the the standard algorithms. When we get into beyond machine learning, supervised machine learning, we get into then deep learning, and that's where the systems are taking on that life of their own. There's an element of it's known as sort of a black box element, where the understanding of these systems' ability to interpret and then react goes beyond the simple if then else statements that how these algorithms are being programmed. That's where the systems are being attacked, and that's where, you know, all hell could actually break loose. And unfortunately, when we're thinking about these systems, the way they're being built, security is not front of mind. It's about the financial efficiency, the financial gain for an organization by implementing these systems. And so until security becomes front and center as part of the design and the decision making in terms of risk versus reward, as well as financial gain, the risk is going to continuously be there. And in reality, it's more about when rather than if that these things could become catastrophic.
2 minutes, Angelo.
There are things that can be done. So looking at limiting the use of these platforms, actually going back to the basics of understanding, you know, what these AI platforms have access to, what they can be doing, and understanding, you know, the value of that in terms of critical systems to the reward or gain for the organization. And then obviously looking at these robust models and continuous testing and training, adversarial training, which the labs I mentioned offer that as well, to continuously evolve these systems for in the positive. So I think I've gone to my allotted time. Hopefully some of that was insightful and at very least an understanding of where industry is looking at this from both a positive angle and an adversarial angle. I'm sure I can share information later on. However, for those in the US, Lisa O'Connor runs our research center that has pulled together a lot of the research around AI and combating AI, and always looking for collaboration with other industry and education. So look forward to hearing more about that. And thanks again, Katina, for including me in today's proceedings.
Thanks for that very illuminating presentation, Angelo. Sorry we couldn't do the Q&As this way, but we can take some questions through the chat if you're able to answer them there.
Yes.
Thanks again.
No worries at all.
Thank you, Angelo, and thank you, Ms. Ilma Hayrick of Arizona State University.